The porcelain teacup slipped from Mrs. Jeon's trembling hands, shattering against the polished wooden floor. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Jungkook's steady voice, his eyes burning with conviction. "I will marry her," he repeated, each word slicing through the air like a blade. His father's face drained of color, his mother's lips parted in disbelief, and the weight of centuries of tradition pressed down on the room like an invisible storm. The confession was not just about love, it was rebellion, a declaration against expectations carved into his life since childhood. Jungkook's heart raced, but his gaze did not falter. He could feel the sting of judgment, the looming shadow of disapproval, yet beneath it all was a fire that refused to die. He had chosen her, the woman who carried secrets of her own, the one who had taught him that love was not about obedience but about courage. His parents' silence was more terrifying than anger. His father's hand clenched into a fist, veins straining against his skin, while his mother's eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "Do you understand what you're saying?" his father finally asked, his voice low, dangerous, trembling with suppressed rage. Jungkook nodded, his chest rising and falling with defiance. "I understand, and I will not take it back." Memories of stolen nights, whispered promises, and the warmth of her hand in his haunted him as he stood there, unyielding. He remembered the way she laughed despite the scars of her past, the way she believed in him when he doubted himself, the way her presence made the world less cruel. She was not perfect, but she was real, and that was enough. The room seemed to shrink, suffocating him with the weight of tradition and duty. His parents had always envisioned a different future, one paved with alliances, wealth, and prestige. But Jungkook's heart had chosen a path of uncertainty, one that demanded sacrifice and risk. He could feel the fracture forming, the invisible line that separated him from the life his parents had built for him. His mother finally spoke, her voice breaking like fragile glass. "You will destroy everything we've worked for." Jungkook's throat tightened, but he forced the words out, each syllable heavy with truth. "I would rather destroy expectations than destroy myself." The confession was not the end, it was the beginning. Shadows of betrayal, whispers of scandal, and the threat of losing everything loomed ahead. Yet in that moment, Jungkook felt strangely free, as if the chains that had bound him since birth had finally cracked. His parents' shock was only the first storm. The world outside would be far harsher. But he had made his choice, and he would stand by it, even if it meant standing alone. And as the silence stretched, the sound of his heartbeat echoed louder than the fragments of broken porcelain at his feet. The chandelier above trembled as Mr. Jeon slammed his fist against the dining table, the echo reverberating through the grand hall like a thunderclap. "You will not disgrace this family," he roared, his voice laced with fury and fear. Jungkook stood his ground, his knuckles white as he clenched them at his sides, his breath sharp and uneven. "I am not disgracing us," he said, his tone steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I am saving myself." The air was thick with tension, the scent of jasmine tea still lingering, mingling with the metallic tang of broken porcelain. His mother's eyes darted between her husband and her son, torn between loyalty and love, tradition and truth. She wanted to speak, but her voice was trapped in her throat, strangled by the weight of centuries of expectation. Jungkook's mind raced back to the night he first told her, the woman he loved, that he would fight for her. Her tears had glistened under the moonlight, her trembling hands clutching his as though he were her last anchor in a world determined to drown her. She had secrets, scars carved deep into her soul, and yet she had given him something no one else ever had: freedom. His father's rage was not just about marriage, it was about control, about the empire he had built and the legacy he demanded his son uphold. "Do you even know what she carries?" Mr. Jeon spat, his voice trembling with contempt. Jungkook's jaw tightened, his heart pounding like a drum of war. "I know enough," he replied, his voice low but unyielding, "and I know that I love her." The words hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, defiant. His mother's tears finally broke free, sliding down her cheeks as she whispered, "Love will not protect you from the world, Jungkook." He turned to her, his eyes softening for the first time that night. "Then let the world come. I will protect her." The storm outside rattled the windows, lightning flashing across the sky as though the heavens themselves were bearing witness to the fracture of a family. Jungkook felt the weight of destiny pressing against him, but he refused to bend. His father's empire, his mother's sorrow, the whispers of society, all of it paled against the fire in his chest. And as the thunder roared, Jungkook's voice cut through the chaos, steady and resolute. "I will marry her. Nothing you say will change that." The silence that followed was not peace. It was the calm before a war that would tear through their lives, leaving scars that no amount of time could heal. The storm outside had not yet passed, but inside the Jian household the tempest was far more violent. Jungkook's father rose from his chair, his towering figure casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the room whole. His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "You think love will shield you from the consequences? You think her presence will erase the shame you bring upon us?" Jungkook's chest tightened, but he refused to look away. His father's words were daggers, each one meant to pierce the fragile armor of his resolve. Yet he stood firm, his voice steady though his heart thundered. "I am not asking for your approval. I am telling you my choice." His mother's sobs filled the air, soft but relentless like rain against glass. She reached for him, her fingers trembling, desperate to pull him back from the edge of defiance. "Jungkook, please, think of what you're risking. The family name, the legacy, everything your father built." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, Jungkook felt the weight of her sorrow pressing against his chest. But then he remembered her, the woman who had taught him that love was not a cage but a key. He remembered the way her laughter had broken through his darkest nights, the way her eyes had seen him not as an heir, not as a son bound by duty, but as a man who deserved to be free. That memory was his anchor, his shield against the storm. "I have thought about it," Jungkook whispered, his voice trembling with emotion yet unbreakable in its conviction. "Every night, every day. And I would rather lose everything than lose her." His father's fury erupted, his hand slamming against the table once more, sending a ripple of fear through the room. "Then you are no son of mine," he spat, his words venomous, final, cruel. The declaration hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Jungkook felt the sting of betrayal, the fracture of blood ties that had once seemed unbreakable. His mother's cry echoed, raw and desperate, as she clutched at her husband's arm, begging him to take back the words. But Mr. Jeon's face was stone, his eyes cold, his heart locked behind walls of pride and tradition. Jungkook's breath caught, his chest aching, but he did not falter. He turned toward the door, his steps slow but resolute, each one echoing like a drumbeat of rebellion. He knew the path ahead would be merciless, filled with whispers, judgment, and battles he could not yet see. But he also knew that love, fragile, imperfect, and real, was worth every scar. And as he reached the threshold, the storm outside roared louder, lightning splitting the sky, as though the universe itself bore witness to the breaking of a family and the birth of a man who refused to surrender. The rain had turned into a relentless downpour, hammering against the windows as Jungkook stepped out of the suffocating dining hall. His chest heaved, his pulse still echoing with the venom of his father's words. "No son of mine." The phrase clung to him like a curse, heavy and unshakable. He paused in the corridor, his reflection fractured in the tall mirror, half shadow, half defiance. Behind him, his mother's sobs carried faintly through the walls, a haunting reminder of the bond he had just severed. He closed his eyes, the memory of her face, tear-streaked, pleading, burning into his mind. Yet even as guilt gnawed at him, another image rose stronger, her smile, the woman he loved, fragile yet fierce, waiting for him in a world that would never welcome her. The mansion's corridors felt colder than ever, lined with portraits of ancestors who had lived and died by tradition. Their painted eyes seemed to follow him, condemning his rebellion. Jungkook's steps quickened, his breath sharp, as though the walls themselves were closing in. He pushed open the heavy doors, and the storm outside embraced him with a violent gust, soaking his clothes instantly. He welcomed it. The rain was honest. It did not judge, did not demand, did not bind him to a legacy he no longer wanted. Each drop was a baptism, washing away the weight of obedience, leaving only raw determination. He whispered her name into the storm, and the sound was swallowed by thunder, yet it gave him strength. Far behind, his father's voice erupted again, muffled by distance but still sharp enough to pierce the night. Orders barked to servants, threats laced with fury. Jungkook knew this was only the beginning. His father would not let go easily. There would be consequences, financial, social, perhaps even violent. But Jungkook's heart had already crossed the threshold. He ran through the rain, each step pounding against the earth, carrying him closer to her. The city lights flickered in the distance, blurred by the storm, and with every stride he felt the chains of his past snapping one by one. He was no longer just a son, no longer just an heir. He was a man chasing the only truth that mattered to him. And as lightning split the sky, illuminating his drenched figure against the darkness, Jungkook whispered again, louder this time as if daring the heavens to defy him, "I will marry her." The storm roared in response, and the night swallowed him whole. The rain clung to Jungkook's skin like a second layer, cold and merciless, but his heart burned hotter than the storm. He sprinted through the empty streets, each step echoing with defiance, each breath a reminder of the words that had severed him from his family. His father's voice still haunted him, sharp and unforgiving, but he forced it into silence with the memory of her eyes, her touch, her promise. He reached the small apartment where she lived, the dim light spilling faintly through the curtains. His chest tightened as he raised his hand to knock, the storm raging behind him like a chorus of judgment. The door opened before he could, and there she stood, her hair damp from the humidity, her eyes wide with worry. "You came," she whispered, her voice trembling as though she had doubted he would. Jungkook's breath caught, his resolve hardening. "I told them," he said, his voice raw, stripped of hesitation. "I told them I will marry you." Her lips parted, her hand flying to her mouth, disbelief and fear colliding in her gaze. She stepped back, pulling him inside, the warmth of her small home wrapping around him like a fragile shield against the storm outside. "You shouldn't have," she murmured, her voice breaking. "They'll never forgive you, they'll never forgive me." Jungkook reached for her hand, his grip firm, his eyes locked on hers. "I don't need their forgiveness, I need you." The words hung heavy between them, fragile yet unshakable. She trembled, her secrets pressing against her chest, threatening to spill. He could see it, the fear she carried, the shadows of her past that she had never fully revealed, but he didn't flinch. He had chosen her, scars and all. The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder rolling like a warning. She turned away, her shoulders tense, her voice barely audible. "You don't know what you're risking, Jungkook. There are things about me, things that could destroy you." He stepped closer, his voice steady, unwavering. "Then let them try. I would rather be destroyed with you than live without you." Her tears fell silently, her body trembling as she leaned into him, the storm outside mirroring the chaos within. For the first time, Jungkook felt the weight of what lay ahead, not just his father's wrath, not just society's judgment, but the secrets she carried, the battles they would fight together. And as lightning split the sky, illuminating their embrace, Jungkook knew the war had only just begun. The storm had eased into a steady drizzle by the time Jungkook and she sat together in the dim glow of her apartment. The silence between them was heavy, not empty but charged, filled with unspoken fears and truths waiting to surface. She traced the rim of her teacup with trembling fingers, her eyes fixed on the floor as though the shadows there might swallow her secrets. "Why do you look so afraid?" Jungkook asked softly, his voice stripped of defiance now, replaced with tenderness. He reached for her hand, but she pulled back, her shoulders stiffening. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice fragile yet sharp. "It's not just your parents, it's not just society. There are things about me, things that could ruin you." Jungkook leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. "Then tell me, let me carry it with you." Her breath caught, her chest rising and falling as though she were battling herself. Finally, she lifted her eyes, and in them was a storm fiercer than the one outside. "I wasn't supposed to survive," she said, her voice breaking. "Years ago I was meant to disappear. I carry debts, enemies, scars that don't fade. If you choose me, you choose all of that." The words struck him like thunder, but instead of retreating, Jungkook's grip tightened. "Then I choose it," he said, his voice steady, his conviction unshaken. "I choose you." Her tears spilled freely now, her body trembling as though the weight of her confession had finally broken her. She collapsed into his arms, her sobs muffled against his chest, and Jungkook held her as though the world itself could not pry her away. Outside, the drizzle softened, the storm retreating into silence. But inside, the war had only begun. Jungkook knew his father's wrath would not rest, that society's whispers would grow louder, and that her past would claw its way into their present. Yet as he pressed his lips against her hair, he felt a strange calm settle over him. For the first time, he was not afraid. He had chosen and he would not turn back. The night pressed in around them, heavy and suffocating, as Jungkook held her trembling form against his chest. Her confession lingered in the air like smoke, refusing to dissipate. He could feel her heartbeat racing, a frantic rhythm that betrayed the fear she tried to hide. She pulled away suddenly, her eyes wide, her voice sharp with desperation. "You don't understand, Jungkook. They're not just enemies from my past, they're still out there. If your father disowns you, you'll have no protection. They'll come for me and for you." Jungkook's breath caught, but his resolve did not falter. He stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek, his voice low and steady. "Then let them come. I won't run from this. I won't run from you." Her tears glistened under the dim light, but behind them was a flicker of something else, hope, fragile and dangerous. She wanted to believe him, but the weight of her past pressed down like chains. "You don't know what they're capable of," she whispered. "They destroyed everything I once had. They will not hesitate to destroy you too." Jungkook's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with defiance. "I've already lost my family tonight. What else can they take from me? I will fight for us." The storm outside had calmed, but inside the apartment the tension was electric. She turned away, packing, her hands clutching at her hair as though trying to tear away the memories that haunted her. "You don't understand the cost," she said again, her voice breaking. "Loving me means living in danger every single day." Jungkook rose, his steps deliberate, his presence filling the small room. He caught her hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Then let danger be our shadow. I would rather walk through fire with you than live in safety without you." Her breath shuddered, her defenses crumbling under the weight of his conviction. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean into him fully, her body surrendering to the promise he carried. And as the night deepened, Jungkook knew that the battle ahead would not only be against his father's wrath or society's scorn, it would be against the ghosts of her past, enemies lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. But he had made his choice, and he would not turn back.
The night stretched long, the storm fading into silence, but inside her apartment the air was thick with tension. Jungkook sat on the worn couch, his clothes still damp, his eyes fixed on her as she paced the room like a caged bird. Every movement betrayed the weight of her past. Every glance toward the window carried the fear of unseen eyes watching. Finally, she stopped, her back to him, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you've done tonight. By choosing me, you've declared war not only on your family, but on people who will never forgive me. They will come, Jungkook, they always do." He rose, his steps deliberate, his presence filling the small space. "Then let them come," he said, his voice low but unyielding. "I've already lost my father's love. I won't lose yours." She turned, her eyes shimmering with tears, but behind them was a storm of doubt. "You don't understand the kind of danger I carry. It's not just whispers or judgment, it's blood, Jungkook, blood that stains everything I touch." Jungkook's chest tightened, but he did not retreat. He reached for her hand, his grip firm, his gaze steady. "Then let me be stained with you. I would rather bleed beside you than live untouched without you." Her breath shuddered, her defenses crumbling. She collapsed into his arms, her sobs muffled against his chest, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. Yet even in that fragile embrace, Jungkook felt the shadows pressing closer, the weight of enemies unseen, the inevitability of battles yet to come. The storm had passed, but the war was only beginning. And as he held her, Jungkook knew that his confession had set into motion a chain of events that neither love nor defiance could easily undo. The dawn crept slowly through the curtains, painting the room in muted shades of grey. Jungkook hadn't slept. His mind was a battlefield, torn between the warmth of her presence and the looming storm of consequences. She stirred beside him, her eyes swollen from tears, her voice hoarse when she finally spoke. "You don't understand how far they'll go. My past isn't just shadows, it's chains, and now you've bound yourself to them." Jungkook turned, his gaze steady despite the exhaustion etched into his features. "Then let me carry those chains with you. I won't let you face them alone." Her lips trembled, her hands clutching the blanket as though it were her last defense. "You think love is enough to fight them? They're ruthless, Jungkook. They don't forgive, they don't forget." He leaned closer, his voice low, each word deliberate. "I don't need forgiveness, I need you. And if they come, I'll fight them, even if it costs me everything." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the city waking outside. She closed her eyes, her tears slipping free, and whispered, "You don't know what you're promising." But Jungkook did. He knew the weight of his words, the danger they carried, the war they invited. And yet, as he brushed a strand of hair from her face, he felt a strange calm settle over him. He had already lost his father's love, already severed the ties that bound him to a legacy he no longer wanted. What remained was her, and that was enough. Outside, the drizzle faded, the sky clearing into pale light. But Jungkook knew the storm was far from over. Somewhere beyond the quiet streets, enemies stirred, whispers spread, and his father's wrath grew sharper. The world was shifting, and soon it would come crashing down around them. Still, as he held her hand, Jungkook whispered again, steady and unyielding, "I will marry you." And in that fragile morning light, his vow became a weapon, a shield, and a promise that would define the battles yet to come. Morning light spilled across the small apartment, fragile and pale, but it could not soften the tension that gripped the room. Jungkook sat at the edge of the bed, his damp hair falling into his eyes, his hands clasped tightly as though holding himself together. She stood near the window, her silhouette framed by the weak glow of dawn, her voice trembling as she spoke. "They will come for me, Jungkook, for us. Your father will not stay silent, and the people I left behind, they will see this as betrayal." Jungkook rose, his steps slow but deliberate, his gaze locked on her. "Then let them see it. Let them know I chose you. I am not afraid." Her laugh was bitter, sharp, filled with despair. "You should be afraid. You don't know the kind of men they are. They don't fight with words or traditions. They fight with knives, with shadows, with blood." The words struck him, but he did not flinch. He closed the distance between them, his hand reaching for hers, his voice steady. "I've already lost everything that was supposed to protect me. My father's empire, his name, his legacy, it's gone. All I have left is you, and that is enough." Her tears shimmered in the pale light, her body trembling as though torn between surrender and resistance. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the fire in his eyes, but the ghosts of her past clawed at her, whispering that love was never enough. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of the city awakening. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of footsteps outside the door, heavy, deliberate, too early for neighbors. Her eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "They've found me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, her body stiffening with fear. Jungkook's heart pounded, his fists tightening, his resolve hardening. He stepped in front of her, shielding her from the door, his voice low but fierce. "Then let them come. I will not let them take you." The knock that followed was sharp, commanding, echoing through the small apartment like a warning. The storm outside had passed, but a darker one had arrived at their doorstep. And Jungkook knew as the sound reverberated through the walls that the war had begun. The knock came again, louder this time, rattling the thin wooden door as though demanding surrender. Jungkook's body tensed, his fists clenched, his breath sharp in the silence. She froze, her eyes wide with terror, her voice barely a whisper. "It's them." The air thickened, heavy with dread. Jungkook stepped forward, placing himself between her and the door, his shadow stretching across the dimly lit room. His heart thundered, but his voice was steady. "Stay behind me." The knock turned into pounding, each strike echoing like a drumbeat of war. Outside, muffled voices barked orders, their tone cold, merciless. Jungkook's pulse raced, but his resolve hardened. He had already severed ties with his father, already chosen her above everything else. Now the world was testing that choice. The door creaked under the force of another blow. She clutched his arm, her nails digging into his skin, her body trembling. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They don't just threaten, they take. They destroy." Jungkook turned to her, his eyes burning with defiance. "Then let them try. I will not let them take you." The lock rattled, the hinges groaned, and in that moment, Jungkook felt the weight of destiny pressing against him. He had no weapon, no allies, only the fire in his chest and the love that had driven him to defy everything he had ever known. The door burst open, splintering under the force, and shadows spilled into the room, figures cloaked in menace, their eyes cold, their presence suffocating. The storm outside had passed, but inside a darker tempest had arrived. And as Jungkook stepped forward, shielding her with his body, he whispered once more, steady and unyielding, "I will marry her." The figures who had forced their way inside stood like shadows carved from stone, their eyes cold, their movements deliberate. Jungkook's body stiffened, his breath sharp as he positioned himself between them and her. The leader stepped forward, his voice low, dripping with menace. "You should have stayed silent, boy. You've chosen the wrong woman." Jungkook's fists clenched, his pulse pounding in his ears. "I chose her," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him, "and I will not let you take her." The man's smirk was cruel, his gaze flicking toward her with a familiarity that made Jungkook's chest tighten. "She belongs to us. She carries debts that cannot be erased. You think your love will protect her. It will destroy you both." Her breath caught, her body trembling as she stepped closer to Jungkook, clutching his arm. "Don't listen to them," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They'll twist everything. They'll make you doubt me." But Jungkook did not falter. His eyes burned with defiance, his voice cutting through the tension. "I don't doubt you. I don't doubt us." The men advanced, their presence suffocating, the air thick with threat. Jungkook's heart raced, but his resolve hardened. He had already lost his father's love, already severed ties with the empire that had defined him. Now he stood on the edge of a war he could not yet see, but he would not retreat. The leader's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as a blade. "Then prepare yourself, because we will not stop until she is ours again." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the storm outside echoing the chaos within. Jungkook's grip tightened around her hand, his body shielding her from the shadows that threatened to consume them. And as the men stepped closer, their eyes gleaming with malice, Jungkook whispered once more, steady and unyielding, "I will marry her." The words were not just a vow, they were a declaration of war. The men stepped fully into the apartment, their presence suffocating, their boots heavy against the wooden floor. Jungkook's body was taut, every muscle braced, his breath sharp as he positioned himself like a shield. The leader's eyes gleamed with cruel amusement, his voice low and venomous. You think you can protect her? You're nothing without your father's empire. You're just a boy playing at war. Jungkook's jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but his voice was steady. I don't need his empire. I don't need his name. I have her, and that is enough. The man's smirk widened, his gaze flicking toward her. She carries debts that will never die. You think love will erase them. Love is weakness, and weakness is what gets people killed. Her breath caught, her body trembling as she stepped closer to Jungkook, clutching his arm. Don't listen, she whispered, her voice breaking. They'll twist everything, they'll make you doubt me. But Jungkook's eyes burned with defiance. I don't doubt you, I never will. The men advanced, their shadows stretching across the room, the air thick with menace. Jungkook's heart pounded, but his resolve hardened. He had already lost his father's love, already severed ties with the legacy that had defined him. Now he stood on the edge of a war he could not yet see, but he would not retreat. The leader's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as a blade. Then prepare yourself, because we will not stop until she is ours again. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the storm outside echoing the chaos within. Jungkook's grip tightened around her hand, his body shielding her from the intruders filled the room with their presence, their shadows stretching long across the walls, their eyes sharp and merciless. Jungkook's body was taut, his breath shallow but steady, his stance protective as he kept her behind him. The leader stepped closer, his boots heavy against the floor, his voice dripping with contempt. You think you can stand against us? You've already lost everything. Soon, you'll lose her too. Jungkook's jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but his voice did not waver. I will not lose her, I will not let you take her. The man's smirk widened, his gaze flicking toward her with cruel familiarity. She was ours long before you. She carries debts that cannot be erased. You think love will save her. Love is weakness, and weakness is death. Her breath caught, her body trembling as she clutched Jungkook's arm, her voice breaking. Don't listen to them, they'll twist everything. They'll make you doubt me. But Jungkook's eyes burned with defiance, his voice cutting through the tension like steel. I don't doubt you, I never will. The men advanced, their movements deliberate, their presence suffocating. Jungkook's heart pounded, but his resolve hardened. He had already severed ties with his father, already chosen her above all else. Now he stood on the edge of a war he could not yet see, but he would not retreat. The leader's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp as a blade. Then prepare yourself, because we will not stop until she is ours again. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in, the storm outside echoing the chaos within. Jungkook's grip tightened around her hand, his body shielding her from the shadows that threatened to consume them. And as the men stepped closer, their eyes gleaming with malice, Jungkook whispered once more, steady and unyielding, I will marry her. The words were not just a vow, they were a weapon, a shield, and a declaration of war shadows that threatened to consume them. And as the men stepped closer, their eyes gleaming with malice, Jungkook whispered once more, steady and unyielding, I will marry her. The words were not just a vow, they were a declaration of war.